Hello everyone, and welcome back to DMG. PCIe SSDs are absolutely ubiquitous today, and it's to the point where most builders don't even consider SATA SSDs for storage in their new builds anymore, because NVMe's are just so much faster, unconstrained by SATA's inherent limits. But let's back it up all the way to the mid-2000s, when SSDs for the consumer market were first starting to become accessible and affordable, and the fastest consumer drive interface was SATA 150 megabytes per second. Now, that hadn't been a limitation before. Hard drives didn't hit that speed. However, with the advent of SSDs, it extremely quickly did become a limitation. And even with SATA 2 hitting 300 megabytes per second, that was still quickly a limitation for massive servers, which needed even faster speeds to keep up with the increasing demands of the internet. Well, it just so happened that there was an interface as of yet unharnessed for the demands of solid-state storage: PCIe. And LSI and Seagate in the mid to late 2000s teamed up to make an incredible piece of hardware that would utilize this interface fully, with speeds over 5 times faster than what SATA SSDs could achieve at the time. It not only topped server drive performance charts for years and years to come, but it actually went on to beat several lower-end and cheaper Gen 3 and Gen 4 PCIe NVMe's with its raw performance. This is the late 2000s LSI Seagate Nytro WarpDrive. Not only is it the coolest named drive in my collection, it's also one of the coolest looking and one of the most bizarrely designed. So I am so glad we have an opportunity to take a look at this weird piece of hardware today. I'm going to tell you a bit more about it, I'll point out some hardware details, I'll take it apart and show you what's inside these drive modules, and then last but not least, I will benchmark it against a variety of server drives. So spinning SAS drives all the way through NVMe disks from many, many years later. First though, let's look at the hardware. What is this? So, you'll notice it has a pretty wide PCIe bus. That's because this is so old that it actually uses PCIe 2.0, and to achieve sufficient bandwidth, it uses PCIe 2.0 by 8. That gives it the same bandwidth as a Gen 3 by 4 NVMe drive, so already working with a whole lot of PCIe bandwidth. A lot of server NVMe's to this day actually use the by 8 interface instead of by 4, so this kind of started a tradition. On the back is the BIOS, some glue logic, and various power conversion circuitries, as well as the Oracle part number. So this was originally, this particular drive that I have here was used in an Oracle server before its retirement. And on the front you have some massive capacitors. I'll talk about this later. And then what appears to be 4 SSDs. And yes, you'd be right. This packs 4 individual SSDs. But even though it's technically 4 drives, it counts as a single SSD in all of its performance tests. So it can go head-to-head fairly with individual SSDs because A, it was sold as one drive, and B, you can't take these off and benchmark these individually or something. These are intended to be used solely with this one card. They won't plug into anything else. So indeed, the Nytro WarpDrive uses 4 custom Seagate SAS SSDs and an LSI Mega RAID SAS controller. So if you're unfamiliar with SAS controllers, this has its own CPU and its own RAM to take load off of the system processor, off of your CPUs. And let's get a closer look at the drives in question, because these modules are really, really fascinating. So while I'm taking it apart, I'll explain a little more. These drive modules are permanently run in RAID 0. They're configured from the factory to run in RAID 0, which is a stripe, meaning they act as one volume. So their sequential read and write speeds are essentially quadrupled. Taking these off makes me extremely nervous because they're held to the board by a really fragile ribbon cable that you're about to see. So this is how they snap into the board, with this tiny, flimsy little cable. And each side of this cable is connected to one of the two drives in each pair. So we'll take that header block off, and you can see this is a proprietary interface. I've never seen any other drive with a connector like this, and I work with server equipment very frequently. So this is SAS. And on the board where I've removed that drive, you can see it proudly touting PCIe Express by 8 Gen 2. These drives are in thick heat sinks. These are extremely substantial cooling solutions for these disks because, once again, these are supposed to be used in servers. And also, these are early SSDs, so the controllers get very, very hot. SSDs controllers hadn't really been mastered yet at this point. It was still the Wild West for these new solid-state storage technologies. So that led to them being pretty hot, inefficient, and at times unreliable. But I must say, this one still works great. Last screw is out, and now the drive modules will start coming apart. So each one contains two actual SSDs, and I'll show you those later. Each of them is thermal padded to these really thick aluminum cases, and they're all stuck together in that big module. They're all in this little group. Each one of these drives is 100 gigabytes. Exactly 100 gigabytes. So that means in total, this whole PCIe card with all of the drives in it is a 400 gigabyte disk. Now this is what it took. This is what it took to make 100 gigabytes. Like, geez, nearly 20 years ago at this point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 NAND chips. Nowadays there are 1 terabyte SSDs and more that use a single NAND flash chip. But back then, you actually needed all of these to make just 100 gigabytes. And the controller is made by SandForce. Unfortunately, they have a really, really terrible reputation when it comes to SSD controllers because they were so unreliable and they were inexpensive and easily accessible. And, I mean, even Samsung used them. They were absolutely ubiquitous, but they were also infamous for their problems. SandForce controllers were blamed for the death of, in particular, OCZ drives. And I've actually seen that firsthand. But these all, despite my reservations, these all seem to be chugging along just fine. They run hot in part due to the controllers, in part due to the fact that there are 24 NAND chips packed into this tiny space. But these drives are surprisingly running just fine. These are like palm-sized. This is oriented this direction, about the size of a SATA connector. So just to give you a sense of scale of how small these are compared to most actual consumer-grade SSDs at the time. Alright, our board is now fully reassembled with all the drive modules attached. Let's go pop it in a computer and test it out. And there we go. It's slotted into a PCIe by 8 slot, and it's all ready to go. It's all set up. And as we're booting up, you're going to see that this Seagate Nytro WarpDrive actually loads an option ROM, just like any other SAS controller. So here's my main SAS controller, LSI SAS2 BIOS that's loading right now. So that's the controller that runs all my SAS hard drives that you're hearing spin up right now. So there's one controller initialized, and then in a couple seconds it's going to pop up that it's loading the BIOS. Yep, Seagate Technology WarpDrive BIOS. So here is the SAS BIOS for the LSI Seagate Nytro WarpDrive. You can see there it is. NWD BLP4 400, that signifies that it has 4 drives, 400 gigabytes. And we can't really change a whole lot in here, because in its firmware it's set to act as only 1 drive, so even though it has 4 SSDs in it, we can't actually change anything. And just for comparison, this is what my main SAS controller's BIOS looks like. So even though you can't actually change any settings in the option ROM BIOS on the WarpDrive, you'll see that it looks identical to a regular LSI Mega RAID controller. So usually when you enter the settings of one of these, you can see the connected drives and you can see your RAID arrays. So we'll just do that really quickly. SAS topology, and then it'll tell you what drives you have connected. So usually that is what it would look like, but unfortunately the WarpDrive has that portion of its BIOS disabled. But let's get into Windows so I can actually test this for you. Okay, well now it's time for our benchmarks. There's a whole lot of information on screen right here, so I'm going to break it down for you all and tell you what all of these drives are. Before we start comparing it though, let's just talk about the Nytro WarpDrive in general though. So you see really fast sequential reads, less so on the writes. And the randoms are pretty slow, even for an SSD of this era. And the randoms are pretty slow. They're no faster than a regular SSD of this era. Because remember, this is a RAID array. It is 4 drives that are striped, and when you stripe drives, the sequential speed is multiplied, but the random speed is still constrained by the speed of a single drive, and it's also slowed down by the overhead of RAID. So the random of this drive is not very good. It does not compare to modern SSDs. But speaking of comparing it to modern SSDs, let's compare it to one that's a couple years newer. Now, this is a Samsung SM961 drive. Here it is on Tech PowerUp. It's a M2 2280. This came with my HP Z840 workstation. This is the drive that HP chose to ship as their first PCIe boot drive. But do keep in mind that this is a decade-old SSD, a decade-old NVMe. It's very early. It's a 2016 drive, and it does still soundly beat the Nytro WarpDrive. But oh, hold on. That's a really good NVMe. Let's look at some kind of crappy NVMe's, Gen 3 crappy NVMe's from a couple years later. So this one, D here, is a Kingston drive. It is the 1 terabyte Kingston NV1 from 2021, and it was more of a budget drive. It was an $85 drive for 1 terabyte. It has a pretty decent sized SLC cache, but it's really slow once you exhaust it, as SLC cache SSDs tend to be. It's still slower than that early, good quality, really nice NVMe from 5 years previous. In the reads, it's a little faster in the writes though, due to just newer NAND technology. Let's look at this really garbage one though. It is significantly slower in every aspect except for randoms than the Nytro WarpDrive. This is an Adata XPG SX6000 Lite. Now there are a zillion different versions of this drive. They made it with a bunch of different versions of NAND and a bunch of different controllers to keep it at that pretty affordable $50 price tag. This is a 2018 drive, and it has SLC cache that's 25 gigs, and it is disgustingly and painfully slow once that cache is exhausted. So what you see here isn't that great for an NVMe, but it gets worse. Now, of course, this doesn't have the SLC cache problem. It's going to be perfectly consistent as you're writing to it. It's going to keep writing at about these speeds as you're writing to the entire drive. So honestly, like, this stacks up really well. The Nytro WarpDrive stacks up really well against like a complete and utter garbage NVMe. Not only is it faster in sequentials in the benchmark than the XPG, but because it doesn't have that SLC cache that when exhausted, the drive is slow as hell, it'll be more consistent performance. You can actually write the whole capacity of the drive without it slowing down to a crawl. Now, this is another kind of early PCIe SSD. It's technically not an NVMe. It's a little weird. This is an Apple drive. It's the proprietary SM256G. And these were available around 2015 at first. These were shipped in a bunch of different Apple MacBooks. They're a little bit bigger than an NVMe, they're made by Samsung, and they have pretty decent performance. This is like 6 years newer than the Nytro WarpDrive, so honestly it stacks up okay. Now here's a modern server NVMe drive. This just does not stack up in any way, shape, or form to the Nytro WarpDrive. This is it's a Samsung made for HP Enterprise. There's the part number. It's a 1.6 terabyte NVMe SSD. Let me grab some pictures for you. So there is this drive. It is a by 8 PCIe drive. It has a massive controller, 8 gigabytes of cache, a ton of NAND. It's a fast drive compared to all the Gen 3 by 4 drives that I have here, but it's mainly designed for endurance, so it's not the max speed you could get out of a Gen 3 by 8 or a Gen 4 by 4, so that's the same bandwidth. Of course, there's just a regular SATA SSD. That is the S31 Gold from Hynix, if it matters, the 1 terabyte version. And of course, it's way faster than a SATA SSD, even a SATA 3 SSD, even though SATA 2 would have been the prevalent interface when this came out, when the Nytro WarpDrive came out. And finally, we're going to round it out with a hard drive. This G here is a RAID array of 4 15,000 RPM Seagate hard drives. Here they are. These are Seagate Savio drives, and these are running on my board's LSI Mega RAID SAS adapter. These are in a striped array. So these are 15,000 RPM, 146 gigabytes each, and they're faster than the SATA SSD, except for randoms, of course. It's still spinning Rust. Now it says the drive here is 88% used. I did clear out the files on the first sectors of the drive, so the sequential tests reflect the maximum speed of the drive. Anyway, this is the most important benchmark, because this is what servers would have been using. They would have been using these compact, super fast drives, these 15,000 RPM little disks, and they get soundly beaten by the Nytro WarpDrive. Quick tangent about these hard drives. I use these for recording super high bitrate videos because some of these NVMe SSDs, the speed drops super low, like below 100 megabytes a second, because of SLC cache, and when the cache is exhausted, they're slow as hell. That's not a problem the hard drives have. They'll keep writing at a consistent speed across the whole disk surface, minus that about like 20% performance drop as you get, closer to the inside of the platter. But anyway, that's also something that this Nytro WarpDrive doesn't suffer from. It doesn't have that SLC cache. It writes at about the same speed across the whole disk surface. So it's actually, it absolutely clobbers this garbage Adata SSD, but eventually, if you pushed it hard enough, it would be faster than the Kingston that uses SLC cache. Of course, it's faster than the SATA SSD. Better than the hard drives. We've established that. That is where I'm going to wrap up this video. So thank you everyone so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was cool taking a look at this super early, really wacky, really innovative SSD. If you did enjoy it, consider subscribing. Every now and then I do buy things for these videos, so, every little bit does help. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope you'll come back and watch another again.